Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. Good morning. It's Friday the 6th of March. I'm Caroline Hepker in London.
And I'm Stephen Carroll in Brussels. Coming up today, Iran targets countries across the Gulf with a fresh wave of strikes as Israel and the US launch more attacks on the Islamic Republic.
Tankers laden with Russian oil head to India as the US clears the way for more imports amid energy market turmoil.
Plus, we report on the role AI is playing in America's bombing campaign against Iran.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
A new barrage of Iranian missiles and drones has targeted at least 5 countries in the Middle East, including Saudi Arabia, Kuwait and Bahrain. The Islamic Republic's latest strikes against its Gulf neighbours prompted several governments to urge their citizens to take shelter. Meanwhile, the United States has suspended operations at its embassy in Kuwait. Explosions were also heard in Tehran overnight as Israel carried out a 12th wave of bombings. In a phone call, the US President Donald Trump told NBC News that he wants to see Iran's leadership structure fully removed and that he has some names in mind for a, quote, good leader. The president's comments come as Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi also spoke to NBC. He says his country has no plans to talk to the US.
We are not asking for a ceasefire, and we don't see any reason why we should negotiate with the U.S. when we negotiated with them twice, and every time they attacked us at the middle of negotiations. So there is no request for a ceasefire by us, and there is no request for the negotiation with the U.S. From us. We have never sent any messages to them.
The Iranian foreign minister also said that Russia and China are supporting Iran politically and otherwise. Asked whether Russia is actively helping Iran in the current conflict, Araghchi replied, "They have always helped us."
Tankers carrying Russian oil are headed for Indian ports this morning after the US granted New Delhi a temporary waiver for imports. The measure, which expires on the 4th of April, is intended to ease pressure on oil supplies and provide immediate relief for India's refining sector affected by the Middle East conflict. It comes as the Trump administration weighs options to address the spike in global energy prices. Samantha Dart, Goldman Sachs' co-head of global commodities research, says the situation is uncertain.
If instead of 5 days, you have, let's say, another 5 weeks of very low flows of oil through the strait, it's very possible that we would see Brent prices crossing the $100 per barrel threshold.
Goldman Sachs' Samantha Dart speaking there. India became a major importer of discounted Russian oil after the invasion of Ukraine, but sharply cut back on purchases after US tariff and sanctions pressure.
The Wall Street Journal is reporting that the United Arab Emirates is considering a freeze on billions of dollars of Iranian assets. The move could target accounts in the Gulf state that are affiliated with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard. Iran has fired more than 1,000 drones and missiles at the UAE since the war broke out 6 days ago. If Emirati officials proceed with the move, it could dismantle one of Tehran's most significant economic lifelines.
Now, Gulf states under attack from Iran are facing the most significant threat to their status as global financial hubs. For years, Dubai and Abu Dhabi have been building their reputations as low-tax jurisdictions, havens for investment from hedge funds to real estate to private equity. But proximity to the world's most volatile region can no longer be quietly discounted. Here is Lloyd Bank's former chief economist, Trevor Williams.
One of the long-term effects that could come out of this is a reassessment of the whole profile of the Gulf. There's probably perhaps a lot of complacency about the fact that somehow they could survive in what is a dangerous neighborhood with no consequences.
That was Lloyds Bank former chief economist Trevor Williams. The UAE's economy minister said that it has, quote, demonstrated its strength in absorbing the pressures generated by economic and geopolitical crises.
In Europe, leaders are pushing back against President Donald Trump's demands that he continues an open-ended military campaign in Iran. Bloomberg's James Woolcock has more.
The way President Trump has treated America's allies is now becoming a hurdle. Europe's military bases, ports and airspace are key strategic points for the US. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer initially blocked access to using them to hit Iran.
I took the decision that the UK would not join the initial strikes on Iran by the US and Israel. Now, that decision was deliberate. It was in the national interest. and I stand by it.
Starmer has since allowed the use of UK air bases for defensive strikes, but he's one of many European leaders who are wary of escalation, with Spain's Pedro Sanchez saying the war runs against his country's values and interests. As the US's open-ended campaign in the Middle East continues, President Trump may come to regret eroding European trust. In London, James Woolcock, Bloomberg Radio.
Anthropic has vowed to challenge a Pentagon decision to designate the company a threat to the US supply chain. The move, normally reserved for foreign adversaries, jeopardizes the firm's Pentagon contract and could block defense partnerships. Its legal challenge comes as the Iran war illustrates how the US military is increasingly using artificial intelligence tools, including Anthropic's Claude, in combat. Bloomberg's Tiba Adebayo has more.
Since the start of military strikes last week, the US has hit more than 2,000 targets. According to the head of Central Command, that volume is more than double the scale of America's assault on Iraq in 2003. Playing a critical role in operations is AI, supporting initial screenings of incoming data, allowing humans to focus on higher-level analysis and verification. But its uses raise questions about the technology's growing role in warfare. Some organizations, such as human rights coalition Stop Killer Robots, are highlighting the risks associated with involving AI systems in combat situations and whether it can be used in a lawful manner. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
Officials at the US Commerce Department have written draft regulations that would restrict AI chip shipments going anywhere in the world. The rules would force companies like Nvidia or AMD to seek American government permission for almost all exports of advanced semiconductors. Analysts fear the plan is to tie AI capacity into trade negotiations as the White House seeks alternative cudgels to tariffs. Bloomberg Technology's Ed Ludlow says it would also leave countries with only one AI alternative, China.
The issue is the vacuum, and this is part of what the people around the president have advised him on, and we've reported on. If you don't allow American companies to export to, say, the Middle East or the Gulf, then China will go into those markets.
Ed Ludlow speaking there as Bloomberg reports the policy is far from finalised. Shares of Nvidia and AMD fell to session lows following the news.
And those are our top stories for you this morning. Now, as we get to the end of this week, let's think about the markets. Stocks in Asia are up this morning on the MSCI Asia Pacific Index, so reversing earlier losses. This, as we see stock futures for Europe more positive, up by 1% this morning. It has been a hugely volatile week, though, in terms of stock trading. The first week of the US's military campaign, epic fury against Iran. Oil prices now trading on an $85 handle for Brent crude futures, WTI $80.48. You've seen a continued bond rout throughout this week. 414 is where we are for US benchmark yields ahead of the US jobs report today. And gold right now is up by 0.7%, $5,117. Those are the markets.
In a moment, we'll bring you the latest on the war in the Middle East after that barrage of new attacks in the Gulf. Plus, we'll be examining the consequences for Russia and Ukraine. But another story that we've been reading this morning about and how what's going on in the Middle East also relates to AI. David Ficklin's been writing about this for Bloomberg Opinion, and the pipeline for the technology being affected by this, particularly in South Korea and Taiwan. They make the majority of the world's high-end chips, but they're also among the most dependent on liquefied natural gas that comes from Qatar to power their grids. Now, when gas supplies from the Gulf were disrupted, their stock markets took that big hit that we've been reporting on. But it's interesting to note that neither of these countries has particularly large storage for gas, unlike, for example, the situation in the European Union. So if shipments do slow down for long, it could start affecting electricity and chip production. Less than a month is the storage that Taiwan has available. And David's writing this is a wake-up call for these countries who've been largely reliant on these energy supplies to be able to build these high-tech economies.
Yeah, I think this is a really key point. You know, everything now is being closely examined. The intersection of technology, war and energy production, hugely important. And we will put a link to David Fickling's story in our podcast show notes for you.
Now let's bring you up to date on the latest developments in the Middle East. Iran targeting several Gulf neighbours while US and Israeli airstrikes continue to hit Tehran and Beirut. NATO is also ramping up its defences for Turkey. We have our managing editor for the Middle East and North Africa, Honor Ant, with us for more this morning. Honor, the intensity of the bombing appears to be growing. What does this mean for Gulf states?
The Arab states in the Persian Gulf have become targets of Iranian missile and drone attacks more frequently and heavily than Israel has been since the beginning of the war, just judging by the various stats that we have seen coming in. And it's somewhat ironic for them because they are finding themselves at the center of this conflict that they tried very hard to avoid and prevent. And it's also ironic because these countries pledged more than $1 trillion, well, trillions of dollars in investments in the U.S. economy, but they are now finding out that they have very little influence over the U.S. Regional policy. And we are seeing signs of growing frustration among the business community, especially in the United Arab Emirates, where some of the big business magnates are becoming more vocal about the cost of the war for their economies. The airspace across the region remains pretty much shut. The Strait of Hormuz is practically at a standstill with very few tankers going through, and it's taking a huge toll on the economies of these regional countries.
Yeah, indeed. Also that issue of the border peace that President Trump had been promoting and trying to get investment for. President Trump also seems to want not just regime change in Iran, but also to install his own choice of leader, the comments that he has made.
Yeah, there is a bit of lack of clarity in what exactly President Trump is hoping to achieve with the war. On the one hand, he has made it clear that he would like to see a regime change. But on the other hand, at times, he has signaled that he could be happy with working with elements of the Iranian administration. And the most recent example of that was last night, which you just referred to. He said he would not want to see Mujtaba Khamenei, who is the second oldest son of the last supreme leader of Iran, who was killed on Saturday when the U.S. attacks on Iran began, and he said he would not want to work with him. So, yeah, there is a little bit of lack of clarity. He seems to be fine with the idea of working a new supreme leader who might bring about some change in Iranian policies. But, yeah, on the other hand, he did say that he wouldn't mind seeing a regime change in Iran either.
Meanwhile, of course, we've been watching the move higher in oil prices this week, on track for their biggest surge in a week since 2022. What is the situation that we know about the Strait of Hormuz this morning?
The Strait of Hormuz remains practically at a standstill. There are very few tankers that are going through. We have seen reports of a Chinese bulk carrier transiting the strait yesterday. But other than that, the flow of oil and LNG has come to a standstill since the fighting began last Saturday, and we are seeing the impact on oil, where Brent is set for its biggest weekly increase since 2022. That said, there seems to be some stabilization in the oil markets this morning after U.S. President Donald Trump reiterated his commitment to the safe passage of oil by offering various guarantees, both in terms of insurance and also in terms of his pledge to provide naval escort to ships that might want to go through the Strait of Hormuz. But as we speak at the moment, there is little, if at all, activity across the strait.
Yeah, indeed. Brent crude currently up 17% this week. Honor, thank you for being with us. Bloomberg's managing editor for the Middle East and North Africa, Honor Ant.
Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Daybreak Europe coming up after this.
Meanwhile, the United States has cleared the way for India to import more Russian oil as the crisis in the Middle East continues. Joining us now for more, Bloomberg's Tony Halpin, who leads our team covering Russia and Ukraine. Tony, how significant is this move by the United States to allow more Russian oil to be sold to India? What does it mean for Russia?
Well, it's good news for Russia's war budget. They had been struggling in recent months with much reduced income from oil and gas sales as a result of US measures to deter India from buying oil, and now those measures have been eased for a month, and there are something like 15 million barrels of oil already on the sea close to India that could be sold, and so it's a boost for Russia's war budget. They were already considering ways to trim spending because they thought $40 a barrel oil would be here for some time, and as we now know, oil is trading around $85 a barrel.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has offered to share his country's expertise countering Shahed-type drones. So again, the Russia-Ukraine war is beginning to maybe play out, have an impact when it comes to Iran. What is Zelensky offering?
The country with the greatest expertise in dealing with these Shahed-type drones, of course, is Ukraine. They've been spending 4 years trying to deter them, and President Zelensky now says that the US in particular has reached out and is seeking advice on how to deter these drones, and he's offering to send specialists to help them with that. And he's also been in contact with Gulf Arab states, essentially making the same offer, which is we'll help you deal with these drones because we have technology that we've developed that brings them down at low cost. But what we need in return is more Patriot air defense missiles to protect our populations. And he's proposing some sort of swap, really, that he'd provide anti-drone technology and they'd provide him with missiles.
Volodymyr Zelensky is also trying to leverage his position to bring the war in Ukraine to an end. How?
Yes, I mean, he's in a difficult spot because even as he's offering to help Gulf nations and the US deter Iran in this war, he himself has to protect his country against Russian attacks, and there's no sign that Russia's easing off on those attacks. And there's no sign, too, that the US is shifting its position to a more favourable approach to Ukraine. Just yesterday, President Trump said it was Zelensky who had to shift and make a deal, and that Putin was ready to make a deal, even though Russia is the aggressor in this war. So he's trying to leverage his expertise and knowledge, really, basically to achieve a more favourable diplomatic position for Ukraine and to win more friends and influence in places like the Gulf, which has had countries that have been trying to mediate a solution to this war.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you so much for being with us, Tony. Bloomberg's Tony Halpin, who leads our team covering Russia and Ukraine. So it is very interesting how this may play out. Of course, worth noting that the US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has said that there is no shortage of munitions when it comes to the US conflict in Iran. The stockpiles for defensive and offensive weapons, are there. And yet there is also, we know, this issue with sort of drone warfare and how to counteract it.
Yeah, and it's part of the broader conversation about how this conflict in the Middle East is having a ripple effect across the world. Of course, the talks between Russia and Ukraine that had been planned for this week were suspended as a result of this war taking place. So I think there's an acknowledgement on both sides as well that certainly the US attention is elsewhere at the moment, as of course the pressure had been on to try and come to a resolution urgently between Russia and Ukraine. Of course, the questions over what that conflict in the Middle East now means for those talks, very much a live one as we look into the course now the 7th day of strikes in the Middle East. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.